rabbis in the 3rd century BCE. But the rest of the Tanakh, the prophets, the other books, were not translated by the Jewish community at all. They were translated by the church. So in other words, the church made its own translation and quoted from its own translation to prove its point. There is not a single top Septuagint scholar in the world who holds to that. We have evidence on many different fronts that although the Torah was translated earlier than the rest of the books of the Hebrew Bible, by the middle of the 1st century BCE or into the 1st century BCE, the rest of the Hebrew Bible had already been translated into Greek. We have manuscript evidence that goes back of some of these books that far. We have references from other writers at that time making reference to the Hebrew scriptures having been translated into Greek. Yes, it's true that the official rabbinic line sanctioned the translation of the 5 books in a certain way. They sanctioned them into Greek, and there's even debate over that. Again, I won't get into that. But very simply, all of the books of the Hebrew Bible were translated into Greek by different Jewish communities before the time of Jesus. So when the New Testament writers quoted from the Septuagint, they were quoting from a widely used Jewish translation of their day. Okay? They were not making it up to suit their purposes. The books existed, and since they were writing for an audience, most of whom understood Greek, the New Testament being written in Greek to reach the largest potential audience because that was the language most used, what did they often do? They often quoted from the Jewish Greek translation of their day. They weren't making it up. They were quoting from an existing translation. So for Matthew, this is a significant thing that this Alma, which Miriam was, is referred to as a Parthenos, and he quotes it using that word. It works out well. It is true, it is insightful, and it is not contrary to what is written in the Hebrew text. What about here, though, in Psalm 110? This is what's being quoted. Matthew 22 is quoting Psalm 110. All right? Psalm 110 begins with the words, "The Lord said to my Lord." Now, Rabbi Singer makes a big issue of the fact that there's no difference. The Lord said to my Lord, the words are exactly the same. Lord, capital L-O-R-D, and then Lord, capital L-O-R-D. Whereas the Hebrew says it a little differently. The Hebrew says, Ne'um Yahweh L'Adoni. Yahweh says to my Adon, my Lord, my Master. And he said that Christian translations obscure that so that you'll think Jesus is identified with Yahweh here, which is not the point. That wasn't his argument at all. Yeshua's argument was simply that David called the Messiah his Master or Lord. That the Messiah is David's son and yet greater than David. That's his whole point. Can I just take you back to something? All of you turn back to Psalm 110. Just speak out loud some of the English translations that you're reading from. Just tell me what you're reading from.
New American Standard.
New King James, New American Standard, Amplified, ESV, English Standard, New Living. Okay. Now, take a look. This is a bunch of different Christian translations. Take a look at Psalm 110, verse 1. All right? Allegedly, the Christian translations are trying to hide something so that you will not realize that Jesus is not associated with Yahweh here. Again, that was not the argument of Yeshua. Now take a look. The Lord says to my Lord. What does it say there in your translations? How is Lord spelled, the first one? Is it all caps? The L is bigger, and then small caps, O-R-D, it's all caps. Every one of those? Of course. Because whenever these English translations see Yahweh, they translate capital L, then small caps O-R-D, to tell you it's Yahweh. Now, the second one, how is it? Capital L and then small O-R-D. Isn't that interesting? There is no conspiracy to hide what is written here. There is no secret, just twist it and make no difference. I remember hearing this as I was driving in my car, listening to the tape many years ago, where this was raised. And just without a Bible in front of me, I said, wait a second, that's not how it's written. It's written, basically every English translation you'll get, every Christian translation. When they want to identify Yahweh, they have capital L, then small caps O-R-D. So Yahweh says to my Lord, Yeshua's whole point and only point is that David calls the Messiah his master, his Lord. It doesn't even matter if you have a capital L or a small L there, okay? He's just saying he's calling him his Adon, his master. End of subject. So therefore, the Messiah is not just David's son, he's greater than David. That's his point. You say, well, but hang on. How come in the New Testament it doesn't do that? It doesn't have that capital L-O-R-D, lowercase small caps, and then how come it doesn't make that distinction? Because that's not how the Jews did it in Greek at that time. It's that simple. If you read the Septuagint, you know how the Septuagint reads, whenever they saw Yahweh, they just translate it with kurios, Lord. And this word Adon, which was also Lord, Master, they also translate it with kurios. So if you read in Greek, if you read in the Septuagint, the way it reads in the Septuagint is, the kurios said to my kurios. And Matthew, writing in Greek, writes it the exact same way. No one's trying to hide anything. And if anyone was trying to hide it, then all these Christian translations would not have read the way yours read, where they clearly make a distinction between Yahweh at the beginning and Lord in the second part. And again, Yeshua was not saying, this proves that I'm God. He's saying this proves that the Messiah is greater than David. He is David's son and greater than David. Well, what about Tobiah's whole thing that this never could have taken place because the Pharisees were too sharp for this? And the whole thing is made up. Here's the problem with that. The way this is written, it's basically like asking the question, do you believe that President Kennedy's assassination was the work of one man, or was there a conspiratorial team trying to assassinate him? The fact of his assassination is taken for granted and unchallenged. The question is, was it one person who did it, or was there a conspiracy against him? The same way here, when Yeshua quotes Psalm 110, all anybody had to raise at any point is, well, this is not a messianic prophecy. This is not referring to the Messiah, and that's the end of the subject. It's raised as everybody knows this, everybody understands it's taken for granted. And even though there are different interpretations of Psalm 110, we actually have ancient rabbinic interpretation that applies Psalm 110 as a messianic prophecy. So we know that there is some ancient Jewish interpretation that understood Psalm 110 to be messianic. And again, for further details, we'll have them in your study guide, and you'll find them in volume 3 right now. There is ancient Jewish interpretation that associates Psalm 110 with Abraham, with David,